Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the all-inclusive Mega Man X Retrospective. We've already looked at Mega Man X for the Super Nintendo and its remake, as well as last time reviewing Mega Man X2 for the Super Nintendo. Mega Man X2 is a fine game that had some decent level design, decent music, decent power-ups, and pretty much decent everything other than the areas where I thought the game really flopped in, like the X Hunters. For a long time now, both of these games have been some of my favorites to replay, but still my opinions on them don't really diverge from the popular majority. So after X1, X2, and Mega Man 7 were released, the 5th generation of game consoles were coming, with gaming making its transition from 2D to the 3rd dimension with the Sega Saturn, the Sony PlayStation, and the Nintendo 64. So Capcom decided to have one last hurrah for the 4th generation, and so the final 16-bit Mega Man X game was produced, titled, of course, Mega Man X3. The game was released in Japan in December of 1995, a very optimal release date, I'd say. However, Mega Man X3 in North America was released in January of 1996, which might have been the worst date they could have possibly come up with, seeing as December is one thing, but January? Doesn't help that this game upon release was pricier than other Super Nintendo games, since it again has the CX4 chip in the cartridge to display enhanced graphics. In other words, unsurprisingly, Mega Man X3 sold very poorly even in Japan. I'm guessing the reason for this ultimately was the fact that all eyes were on the next generation of game hardware, and people probably weren't willing to go back to weaker hardware just to experience the last Mega Man X game on the system. Capcom was probably aware of this fact, and so very shortly after, Mega Man X3 was released in a remastered form for the PlayStation 1 and the Sega Saturn with some changes to the gameplay and an updated soundtrack with real instruments and FMV cutscenes. I can't tell you if this game sold better than the original, since I couldn't find anything on that, but I do think it's a safe assumption it did, given its release on more commercially relevant consoles. Another problem comes in since the 32-bit version of X3 was only released in Europe and Japan, while the PC version of X3 was released here and did contain a few new features from the 32-bit version, but I don't think many people played that either. Americans didn't get a simple way to play Mega Man X3 until 2006 with the Mega Man X collection on the PS2 and the GameCube, which included the PS1 version of the game. That serves as a smooth segue into the fact that fans of Mega Man X have concluded that Mega Man X3 is one of the weaker games in the series, being better than X6 or X7 but not as good as the rest. Reasons being flawed difficulty balancing, backtracking, weaker level design, among other things. I first played X3 right after X2, but at first I really didn't care for this game either. Not for level design or anything like that, just because I was spending a lot of time dying on bosses since I was guessing what the weakness order might be, and I just gave up on the last Maverick stage I did. Then moving on to X4 and X5, after finishing them, there was always something pulling me back to X3. This game has a ton of variables and things to do, so at the same time I was replaying the other 4 games to get better at them, I was doing so for X3, but this game kept giving me more trouble than the rest. And the process of getting better and better kept me playing it over and over until I had the game mastered. And from there I tried to learn as much as I could from watching speedruns, and that's when the game became one of my favorite games in the series, and this video is here to analyze it and see where it succeeds and fails. So let's start with the story. I figured it would be important to start with the fact that chronologically Mega Man X3 takes place after the events of Mega Man Extreme, a game that I'll review later. Said game takes place after X2 and before X3. Not much really changed by those events, but I still figured I'd let you know that. Anyway, Zero is back on the force, but Maverick crimes are the same as ever until a Reploid scientist by the name of Dr. Doppler comes onto the scene with a cure for the Maverick virus, and so the crimes stop. But the world is so thankful of Doppler that he gets a whole city named after him. A few months later, though, Mavericks are back at it again, and X and Zero go out to stop them, but the problem is they find that Dr. Doppler is responsible. But right then and there, they get a call that Maverick Hunter HQ is under attack, meaning that they were sent out on missions to distract them from protecting the HQ. X and Zero rush back to defend headquarters and find out that Dr. Doppler has 8 Mavericks running amok in the city, and now X and Zero have to defeat them. Quick spoiler warning now. Dr. Doppler, seeing how much progress the duo are making against him, sends out the Nightmare Police, those being Bit, Bite, and Vile Mark II, since Dr. Doppler resurrected him before these events took place. In the end, the Nightmare Police are defeated, and then it's revealed that Dr. Doppler built a new body for Sigma, and he's back again for X to defeat. Depending on your actions, either Zero and X will escape with Sigma defeated, or X will escape with Dr. Doppler sacrificing himself for the greater good and he tries to destroy Sigma. Ending the game with X yet again wondering why this fight must go on and what will have to be sacrificed for peace to be achieved. X3's story is pretty good. Unfortunately, the game begins with a 3-minute long cutscene that can drag on for a very long time in repeat playthroughs, however it can be skipped, as well as boss intros at the beginning of every stage. So enough of that, let's dive into the game design. The intro stage is fairly typical, seeing as you're given some basic platforming and wall jumping, as well as basic enemies to fight your way through. Things change when halfway through X gets captured and Zero has to save him, but this time we're playing as Zero fully for the first time in any Mega Man game. We have plenty of time to get into that later, so I'll save it for then. Intro stages after X1 are never an issue, by the way, but for consistency's sake I am going to discuss the intro stage, but again, keep in mind the fact that none of these are bad unless I point out a flaw that is bad. From there, we're again thrown into 8 stages, filled to the brim with combat and platforming. The level design in this game is still pretty good for all the reasons stated in the X2 review, but I noticed that X3's level design suffers from moments where you walk straight and not much is going on, which is annoying no matter what game it is. In addition to that, there are moments where X or Zero must blast their way through enemies with some pretty beefy health bars. Not something that mashing the shoot button is going to prevent from becoming annoying, but to be fair, not everyone can mash the button on a controller as fast as someone else might be able to, so putting enemies in your way like this can be troublesome. These are problems that can plague almost every level in the game, I might add. Another problem is the fact that some of these levels can go on for a pretty long time. For example, Blast Hornet stage can go on for 6 whole minutes, which for a 2D platformer is a really long time. At best, many levels are 4 minutes, and at worst, 6 or 7. This might have been a problem in X1 and X2, but I sure noticed it here more. What you really need to keep in mind for these reviews is that, again, I'm trying to focus on the aspects that are specific to each game. I enjoy playing through X3's levels quite a bit, since like I said, they have all the same things going for them as X1 and X2, but I already said why I like playing these games. I already said X can dash at default in X2, so there's no need to say that kind of stuff again. Moving away from that, not sure if you can call this a level design issue, but it seems that there are many times in Mega Man X3 where the player is forced to make a leap of faith with no way of knowing what will be awaiting you, and once you find out, you're already dead. I know what's coming already, but someone who's never played before most likely will not. Moving away from criticism to something I'm very mixed on would be thankfully the level changes from X1 are back, therefore increasing the world building of Mega Man X3. But I say mixed because I like how beating Volt Catfish means that the power is activated in Blizzard Buffalo's level which melts the ice, or how it makes the elevator in the special stage work. The other two are pretty weird though. You see, Gravity Beetle stage is an air hangar with a bunch of crates in it. Basically, a plane leaves this level for Blast Hornet's level, to which crates are dropped off and picked up. But beating Blast Hornet means the blocks in Gravity Beetle stage are gone, but by beating Gravity Beetle, the plane never shows up in the first place. I'm not sure that makes any sense from a logical point of view, but in the game design this is pretty annoying for a reason to be explained later in the video. However, a pretty subtle one would be how beating Blast Hornet, the enemies with cannons on their heads don't have cannons anymore. As usual, X needs to collect 8 heart tanks and 4 sub-tanks with the same functionalities as last time, but I recommend getting these things, seeing as in this game an issue is how easy it is to die. At the very start of the game, many enemies hit like a freaking 18-wheeler, typically killing you in about 3 hits, especially bosses. Other than that, the amount of collectibles has been expanded from the last 2 games. X can collect 4 ride armors in a few of the stages. Oh wait, I never talked about those. I didn't think they were worth mentioning in the other 2 reviews because they didn't add much. Basically, in X1, X could pilot a robot that could jump and punch. That's about it. In X2, X could pilot a robot that has Spike for a hand and could hover for a few seconds. In this game, X can find 4 separate ride armors you can summon from select stations in each stage. The Chimera armor is the same as X1. The Kangaroo armor is the same from X2, only without the glide. However, the Frog armor is my least favorite. It is unique since it's the only one that can operate underwater, but other than that, it doesn't have any advantage in any other environment. It also has a really awkward jump that makes the parts where you should use it in Doppler Stage 2 unnecessarily more difficult than need be. The Hawk armor is my favorite since it can hover for a brief moment and it shoots missiles that damage enemies effectively. These ride armors are pretty good and add to the experience. However, we have a huge issue in the fact that you need the Chimera armor in order to use any of them. And with that level being the last in the weakness order, many players will grab them and never use them ever, which kinda kills the point of the system. X has again ditched his armor from the previous games, and luckily Dr. Light has recorded 9 new messages as well as parts for X. The foot parts will allow X to dash horizontally like X2, but in addition to that, allowing X to dash vertically, which really does come in handy. The arm parts allow X to charge up special weapons for a more powerful attack. In addition to that, it allows X to charge his Buster and make it able to release 2 shots like X2, this being the ability I use most of the time. The other one being how if X releases both shots at the same time, they release a wave attack that wrecks the frame rate for a brief bit. The game's enemy placement seems like it's lined up perfectly for this ability, but I still don't use it very often. The body armor reduces damage by 50% as usual, but upon getting hit, a shield is emitted that when being hit inside the shield, damage is reduced by 75%. Lastly, the head parts are the best they've ever been, but still has a few flaws. Basically, X can be shown a scan of the levels at the beginning that highlights all collectibles in the stage, and telling you what you have and don't have on the stage select. This does a much better job of revealing secrets in the head parts of the second armor, but still the problem is that you only get the map once per stage at the beginning, so you have to memorize it. Also, it's hard to tell where you are in context to the red dots. Maybe there could have been like a blue dot to show your location, since the SNES's X button doesn't do anything in these games, so they should have had the map come up upon pressing the button. Upon getting all of these parts, we've assembled the third armor, and is personally my favorite so far. I prefer the second armor's arm parts, but the other 3 abilities make up for that. We aren't done yet though, since the 4 levels that don't have regular capsules all have pink ones that contain the enhancement chips. These increase X's third armor abilities, such as the Hyper Crash, which allows you to shoot charge shots without charging, the Double Dash, which allows you to dash twice, the head parts that allow you to regenerate your health by standing still, and finally the body parts reduce damage by 75%, and when the shield is activated, it reduces damage by 90%. A drawback with these is that you can only get one at a time, and the one you get you're stuck with since you can't get another one, leaving you no room to experiment with it. The PlayStation 1 version fixes this by allowing you to switch between them, meaning that in that version I like this mechanic, since you have room to experiment with which part you like the most. Last but not least, in the first Doppler stage, if you make it all the way to this point with full health, you can get the Golden Armor, which gives you all 4 enhancement chips. But you can't get the Golden Armor if you got any of the enhancement chips prior to this, so I'd recommend holding off on the chips until now so you can get all 4. As usual, X3 has 8 new Mavericks to face, those being in weakness order: Blizzard Buffalo, unless you're playing the PS1 version, and there it's Blizzard Buffalo, Toxic Seahorse, Tunnel Rhino, Volt Catfish, Crushed Crawfish, Neon Tiger, Gravity Beetle, and Blast Hornet. On my Let's Play channel, I'm doing 4 versions of this game. In the PlayStation playthrough, I did the weakness order, and it sucks. For pretty much one reason. There are many power-ups you can't get on the first run, meaning that at the end you'll have to do a lengthy backtracking sequence. And with that makes several other problems, like not having enough health to make it through some of these bosses. In general, these bosses hit pretty hard, most of them having really predictable patterns, but that's obscured by the damage output. I managed to defeat most of them, except Volt Catfish and Toxic Seahorse, and I had some trouble with Neon Tiger and Crushed Crawfish, but keep in mind that I've played this game a lot, and I'll just leave it at that. My personal order is Tunnel Rhino, Blizzard Buffalo, Blast Hornet, Neon Tiger, Toxic Seahorse, Gravity Beetle, Volt Catfish, go back to Tunnel Rhino for the heart tank and head parts, and lastly Crushed Crawfish. This order removes backtracking from almost half the game and is easily the fastest 100% way through. This relates to a much larger issue that most of the items are found the same way, by breaking through a wall with Tunnel Rhino's weapon or using a special weapon with the arm parts. But you need the foot parts and Tunnel Rhino's weapon to get that, so the customization is nowhere near as strong as X1 and X2. I also hate how some of these are placed though. I think it's better than X2, I'm thinking how some of them require specific things to have happen, like how the crates in Gravity Beetle stage are blocking the heart tank, and beating Blast Hornet stage causes them to go away, as I established earlier. But nothing in the game would lead you to believe that. So you just have to keep guessing as to what's going to get that heart tank, but nothing in the game actually does. No weapon, no armor, no nothing. Moving away from that into the actual weapons, each boss gives X a new weapon like usual, and these are some of the best weapons in the series. Frost Shield allows X to kill enemies with ice that causes them to drop health. Acid Burst is probably the weakest one of the bunch, and while it does hurt enemies, it doesn't really give you much of a tactical advantage over the X-Buster. Tornado Fang breaks through the walls, but is not really a great weapon. Triad Thunder is one of the best ones in the series since it gives you a shield and hurts enemies a considerable amount of damage. Spinning Blade kills almost everything in next to no time. Ray Splasher works as a good spread shot to kill multiple enemies at once. Unfortunately, Gravity Well is one of the weakest weapons in this series since it does next to nothing in damage to almost every enemy, and I only really ever use it twice in the whole game. Lastly, the Parasite Bomb can freeze enemies, allowing you to get past them, and also make smaller enemies fly into each other. Before we move on to the final levels, we have discussed 3 more things. Like I said, Zero is playable in X3, but at the same time he's not. You can select Zero in any stage, but he can't do anything. In this game, Zero is pretty much a clone of X. He can charge 2 big shots and slash with his Z-Saber, which does a ton of damage. The problem is, Zero cannot fight mini-bosses, fight bosses, collect sub-tanks, collect heart tanks, and collect Dr. Lake capsules, and collect ride armors. In other words, Zero can do next to nothing and can only be played as for maybe a minute and a half of continuous progress. Zero has only 1 life, and so if he dies, he's out of the picture for good. So I don't know what the point of even putting him in the game was if he literally does nothing. And also saying you put him in the game on the back of the box. Next up, the Nightmare Police will interrupt your progress to challenge you. Bit will always appear in stages 3, 4, and 5, with Bite appearing in stages 6, 7, and 8. These bosses will probably trouble you for a few lives, but still, the patterns are simple enough to not have much trouble come from them. For Vile Mark II, you can find them by locating secret portals in certain levels to go through the special stage. Beating these 3 with their weaknesses means that they die, but with any other weapon they just retreat. It could be troublesome that you have to fight 2 of the Nightmare Police in stages. I don't really mind it, but some people might mind the fact that you have to fight them. I think the best of both worlds between the Nightmare Police and the X-Hunters would be Vile Mark II as the pros of both parties and none of the cons, since you have the option to face him and you actually affect the game this time around. Before we head into the climax of the game, I figured now would be a good time to mention the graphics and sound as well as the various versions of X3 that exist. Graphically, Mega Man X3 for the SNES is by far the best presentation in the series so far, with a wide variety of backgrounds and animations for X and Zero, as well as the enemies and bosses. Most importantly, the frame rate rarely ever drops, nor does the game slow down aside from the arm parts. Whether it be wireframe effects or multiple things on screen, X3 puts the struggling engine from X1 and X2 to its limit and really creates a good looking game. Sound-wise, Kino Yamashita composed the soundtrack for the Super Nintendo version, and while many songs sound very similar, yes, the same can be said for X, X2, Mega Man 7, and Mega Man and Bass, and 3 of those games have great soundtracks, and X3 is no different in my eyes. 32-bit version added new sound effects and, like I said, had FMV cutscenes to tell the story. Nothing complicated, but it still shows they put some effort into the re-release. The PS1 version as a whole is pretty much the same game, only with the new things I've already mentioned. And the PC version that I actually do own has an easy mode, making the entire game of the difficulty balancing of X1 and X2. I managed to beat Toxic Seahorse without breaking a sweat, for God's sake. The Saturn version of X3 unfortunately isn't that good. The reason why is because this version has a ton of slowdown, and that's about it actually. But this completely changes the quality of the game drastically, as evidenced by the fact that the Saturn version of X3 got some pretty low scores, with one reviewer calling it the worst game on the system. All three of these versions have an updated soundtrack with real instruments, and while there are many diverse opinions on this, I think it's really been growing on me these last few months. I love this soundtrack so much I probably should make a top 10 about it. However, in 2012, one person named XJustin3009X, link in the description, began working on a remastered version of X3, and the final product being Mega Man X3 The Zero Project. This has been confused as a version of the game that just swaps X with Zero. If it was just that, I wouldn't care about it at all, let alone review and let's play it alongside officially released games. This game, yes, it does have Zero as a fully integrated playable character. But the thing is, it does so much more than that, like how in the process of making Zero playable, he balanced the Z-Saber to be less powerful and allowed Zero to get every collectible, including the capsules. And Zero can use them all in his own way. The third armor's arm parts have been changed to a much better charge shot for X. He didn't have to do that, but he did, and the game feels like it was really made for this charge shot, so I'm glad he did. The dialogue that references X has been rewritten to reflect there being two playable characters. In addition to that, in the original game, whenever X talked, the text box said Mega Man, but it's been changed to X. When X gets a heart tank, Zero gets it as well, and vice versa. You'd think that would be obvious, but every other official Mega Man X game with multiple playable characters doesn't do this, so thank God for the Zero Project. The Zero Project itself has 3 different versions released for it, with each version adding new features and tweaking the visuals slightly. So with that said, you can find the game on romhacking.net, and I heavily recommend it. I also recommend subscribing to XJustin3009X's channel if you're interested, since he's working on a Zero Project version 2 of Mega Man X2, which will fix many of the issues I talked about in the last review. So please show your support. It's an entirely free hack, so if you like Mega Man X and aren't playing this, you definitely should be. Finally, we reached the end of the game and can go through the Doppler stages. The first one is pretty fun, since it doesn't last very long, and the level design is constantly changing it up to make the whole thing more interesting. This is where you get the golden armor, and in the Zero Project you can get Zero the black armor, and doing so will give X the golden armor, and vice versa. At the end, we fight one of 2 bosses. If Bit and Bite are both killed by their weaknesses, then we fight this trash bot, which is incredibly easy and simple. If Bit and Bite are both alive, they combine together to form a more dangerous enemy, which hits like a tank, but still is an incredibly easy pattern. I figured there would be a different boss if one and not the other was left alive, but that isn't the case, unfortunately. You fight the same boss as if both were alive. But overall, this is why I enjoy Bit and Bite more than the X-Hunters, the fact that something about your actions changes the game. But still, I wish there were new bosses if you hadn't killed one and not the other. The second stage is also good, because if you killed Vile Mark 2, then the levels will be clean and have the strongest enemies in the game. At the end, you'd face an extremely easy fish boss that can barely hurt you. If you don't beat Vile, then this level will be a wreck with the same crappy enemies from every other stage in the game. And at the end, you'll fight Vile again, and defeat him for good. If Vile was defeated in the Maverick stages and Zero was left alive, he can face a mini-boss in this level, and upon defeating him, Zero gets damaged, and he gives X the Z-Saber, and it is our super power move this time around. And of all of them, it's by far my favorite, since it kills bosses in 2 hits via a projectile or with less damage, but still 2 hits with a direct slash. I prefer it since you can use it no matter how much health you have, making it more accessible than the other 2 superpower moves. Noteworthy thing being how in the Zero Project, if you did all the requirements and made it here as Zero, X warns you to be careful, giving you a reminder not to go through the door if you want to see Zero's ending, which is, by the way, a lot more interesting than X's ending, but if you want the Z-Saber, then you can totally get it. Lastly, this level has a really stupid section at the end where you wait on a snail robot through a section of spikes, and it takes forever. And you have to be pixel perfect with your movements or else you're dead and you have to do it again. Or you just fall and have to do it again. Equally annoying. The last Doppler stage is the boss rush, and it sucks. I said last time how annoying it was to have to fight the same bosses you fought before, only now effortlessly since you have all their weaknesses. In this game in general, bosses are easily destroyed by their weaknesses, and so 10 whole minutes of you just plowing through these guys is just tedious. And since I played this game several times for this video, I was beyond sick of this crap. After defeating Doppler, X makes his way to the resurrected Sigma, of whom the first phase is really stupid since the pattern, despite being incredibly telegraphed, is really fast, so you have next to no time to react appropriately. Doesn't help that he hits pretty hard. You can cling onto the wall next to him and spam his weakness, which works perfectly, but the problem here is that there isn't a happy middle ground between being bombarded with shots and not taking a single hit. But once that ends, the final fight begins.
That and the final boss.
It's so easy. This has been considered one of the hardest bosses in the entire history of the franchise, and I really don't mind him that much. I know what EXO's writing in the comments, but it's not because I've played this game several times or anything like that. It's because ever since my first playthrough, Sigma never gave me that much hell. Sure, I used a few sub-tanks, but I didn't have too much trouble. Yes, the hitbox is weird since you're supposed to shoot through the exhaust port, but the head lights up, and so you're supposed to think the head is the weak point. But the thing is, guys, once you figure it out, which shouldn't take very long given how little options there are, you can't mess it up now because you already found out. He moves incredibly slowly, and really the attacks he does shouldn't get in your way too much since they seem awfully telegraphed to me, especially this blue laser attack. With all that said and done, you have to escape with this rising fire section, and that, in my opinion, is the hardest part of the whole climax, since if we die here, it's all the way back to the beginning. But with that, the game comes to a close. As this video comes to an end, I had a strange feeling a quarter of the way through writing the script. That being that this game, when put under a critical microscope, kind of falls flat in its face. Don't get me wrong, I love this game to death and would easily put it in my top 20 games of all time for all the fun it brought me while trying to get better and better at it, eventually mastering it beyond all recognition. The third armor was the best one so far, the stages are fun to play, the soundtrack and technical stuff are through the roof. But ultimately though, the ride armor system, the enhancement chips, and the boss design were all a complete failure for multiple stupid reasons that never should have made it past playtesting. I know there were many people who were probably expecting a glowing review of this game from me, and while I did praise the game for reasons I felt deserved to be praised, like I said, I'm not trying to say the same things I said in previous reviews over and over again. So when it comes to the things that Mega Man X3 added to the Mega Man X formula, I found them to be messy. But the foundation it was built on was very strong, so by no means was Mega Man X3 a poorly designed game. Far from it, the game just has problems that can't be ignored. And I believe I'm a competent enough reviewer to segregate how much fun I have while playing a game from the actual quality of the design. Like I said a million times in the LP, I love this game, so keep that in mind if you ever review a game. Lastly, to address the reception X3's gotten from many fans, I think it's quite unfortunate to be honest. Specifically in North America, X3's limited release made it so that not many people got the chance to play it when they were younger and went on to X4 and X5, playing the crap out of those as well as X1 and X2, and therefore becoming more adapted to those games' flaws. And as a result, X3 was never given that chance, and people played it later and upon getting annoyed, the game was just written off. I believe that if X3 got a release on PS1 in North America, that this game's legacy would be entirely different today. But that's just speculation since no one truly knows. You can find Mega Man X3 on the Wii U and 3DS for $7.99, and on the Mega Man X collection for the PS2 and the GameCube. The original cartridge will cost you quite a bit. Rockman X3 is about $30, but the original game can go up for $1,000 complete in box, so I really strongly recommend you don't buy that. I still feel the Zero Project was definitely a well-designed game from start to finish, since it takes the good foundation that was the original X3 and builds upon it to make a game that I think anyone can get down with. If you want to hear my further thoughts, I did a collab review of this game on the SideQuest Gamers channel you should all go check out. So in the end, not much else to say here, so thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Lastly would be how Mega Man X3 randomly got released on the Genesis by random people out of nowhere based on the Saturn version and is somehow worse. Ah, screw it, I'm not talking about that excruciatingly painful tripe. I played this for the collab I did with Alec Alger the SideQuest Gamer a few months ago, and I did it for the LP, and the video will come out soon. I would want to talk about how buggy this game is, but I never want to play this game again. It literally gave me nausea. I'd rather play Mega Man X6 over it any day. Doesn't help that I paid $50 for this shit.